My wife trusted me for 5 minutes, which already feels like a bold decision on her part. That's not a long time. That's not even a full commitment. 5 minutes is more like, I'll be back before anything goes wrong. And she said it the way people say things when they're already preparing themselves emotionally. She goes, "Can you just handle this real quick?" And I said yes immediately, because I didn't want to give her time to rethink it. If you pause, they start explaining. And once they explain, realize you should not have said yes. Now, when my wife says, "Just handle this," she means in the simplest possible way, the way a normal adult would do it. I hear it as a challenge. I hear it like, how many different ways can we approach this? Because my brain doesn't go to the shortest path. It takes the scenic route, with stops and construction, and a guy waving a flag who doesn't seem confident in his job. She left the room, which is the part that surprises me the most looking back. She fully walked away. She trusted the silence. I stood there thinking, all right, let's do this the responsible way. I'm not going to rush. Rushing leads to mistakes. That's what people say who take way too long. So I start preparing, not doing the thing, preparing to do the thing. That's where I really shine. If there were awards for almost starting, I'd have a shelf. About 2 minutes in, I realized something important. I don't fully understand what she meant. Not because she explained it wrong, because I nodded too early. I nodded during the sentence. I caught the beginning and assumed the rest was common sense. And now I'm standing there trying to reverse, engineer her expectations, like I'm in some kind of low-budget detective show, going, okay, if she said it that way, she probably meant not this. That's when confidence shows up for no reason. Start making decisions, big ones, permanent feeling ones. Every decision feels right in the moment because no one is there to stop me. That's the danger zone. Alone confidence, that's when I tell myself she's going to be impressed, which is a wild thought to have while guessing. By minute 4, I'm fully committed to a version of events she did not approve. I'm adjusting things that did not need adjustment. Fixing problems that did not exist. I'm creating a situation. And in my head, I'm already explaining it later. Practicing the tone. Calm, reasonable. Like, well, when you really think about it, that sentence never ends well for me. Then I hear her footsteps, and this is where time slows down, because you realize you don't have enough seconds to undo confidence. You can't put it back. Confidence doesn't rewind. It just stands there waiting to be judged. And I'm looking at what I've done, trying to remember how it looked before, and my brain is going, maybe she won't notice, which is insane, because I noticed. She walks in, looks at it, and doesn't say anything right away. That pause is loud. That's when you know you've disappointed someone quietly. And I'm already starting to explain, even though she didn't ask, saying words like technically, and I thought, and this makes more sense if you think about it from my angle. And I can tell from her face that my angle was never part of plan. She just says, I was gone 5 minutes, and I don't have a response for that, because she's right. Time-wise, this is on me. I want to argue that 5 minutes is a lot of time if you use it efficiently. But clearly I did not. Now I'm standing there realizing something about myself. I don't need supervision because I'm reckless. I need supervision because I'm creative. Left alone, I start imagining possibilities. And none of them match reality. I don't know why she thought this time would be different, but I do appreciate her optimism. That took courage. At this point, I'm still convinced part of this is impressive. Not the result, the effort, the thought process, the journey. I want credit for that. I want her to say, I see what you were trying to do. Instead, and she's looking at me like I borrowed her trust and didn't return it in the same condition. The worst part is, if she asked me again tomorrow, I'd still say yes. Because in my head, I'm always one attempt away from nailing it. The moment she asked me, I said yes before my brain had time to join the conversation. That's my reflex. It's not confidence, it's momentum. Once the word yes leaves my mouth, I feel locked in. Backing out would expose something about me I'm not ready to explain. She didn't even finish the sentence. She just started with, "Can you handle?" And I cut her off with a nod that said, "I'm already halfway done." That nod is dangerous. That nod has ruined entire afternoons. What I agreed to wasn't complicated, smart, at least not in the way she meant it. Was one of those tasks that lives in the category of obvious, which is where I struggle the most. When something is obvious, no one walks you through it. They assume shared understanding. And I like to believe we have that. They're smart. I want to believe I'm the kind of person people can trust with something quick. So I don't ask questions, because questions feel like doubt, and doubt feels like failure before you even begin. There's also something about how she asked. Casual, almost optimistic. That tone does something to me. Makes me feel like this is a test I've already passed just by being selected. I'm thinking, she wouldn't ask if she didn't think I could handle it. That thought alone is enough to convince me I can. I don't need instructions. Instructions are for people who hesitate. I'm already moving. Inside my head, I'm rehearsing how smooth this is going to look later. I picture her coming back and everything being exactly how she imagined, maybe even better, which is a bold goal for a man who doesn't fully know what the goal is. But that doesn't slow me down. It speeds me up, because now I'm not just doing the task, I'm performing competence. And performance requires commitment. I don't stop to clarify because I've confused speed with capability. I believe that if I move quickly and confidently enough, the details will sort themselves out. They always do in theory. In reality, they wait until someone points them out. But right now, I'm alone with my optimism, and optimism is loud when it doesn't have competition. There's a brief moment right after she leaves where I could still fix this. I could pause, I could follow up with a simple question. Something harmless. Something like, "Hey, just to be clear," but that sentence never makes it out of my mouth, because now it feels too late. I've already accepted the responsibility emotionally, even if I haven't executed it physically. Asking now would feel like admitting the yes didn't mean what it should have meant. So instead, I double down on the yes, start building a plan around an assumption. I tell myself that clarity is overrated and intuition is just experience you don't remember earning. Convince myself this is how capable people operate. They don't ask, they act. And the more I believe that, the more confident I sound, even in my own head. By the time I actually begin, the task has already changed shape. It's no longer about helping her for 5 minutes. It's about proving something silently, about justifying the immediate yes. The pressure of that turns a simple favor into a quiet performance, one where I'm both the actor and the only audience, fully convinced I'm nailing it, unaware that the mistake already happened the second I answered too fast. The moment I realized the task was simple, something in me refused to accept it. Simple feels suspicious. Simple feels like a trick. Someone says, It's easy. I don't hear reassurance, I hear a warning. My brain immediately starts searching for the part they're leaving out, because surely no one would hand me something straightforward and expect it to stay that way. That's not how my experience with responsibility has gone. Instead of seeing simplicity as a relief, I see it as an open invitation to improve things. And I don't mean improve in a helpful way. I mean improve in a personal way, the kind that only makes sense if you're inside my head. I convince myself that the task can be done better, more thoroughly, more thoughtfully, even though no one asked for thoughtful. They ask for quick. But quick feels careless. Careless feels like I'll get blamed later, so I aim for impressive instead. What starts as one small decision turns into a strategy meeting I didn't schedule. I'm standing there considering options that were never presented. I'm weighing outcomes that don't exist. In my mind, I'm already explaining my choices to someone who hasn't questioned them yet. That's how I know I've gone too far. When you start defending decisions before they're challenged, you've crossed into unnecessary territory. I tell myself I'm being responsible. That's the word I use to justify it. Responsibility sounds mature. Responsibility sounds like something no one can argue with. But what I'm really doing is adding layers where there were none. I take a straight line and start bending it gently, just enough to feel involved. The problem is, once you bend it, you have to keep track of the bend. And I'm not great at remembering why I changed things in the first place. There's also a quiet ego involved. I want the result to reflect effort, not just completion. If it's done too easily, it feels like anyone could have done it, and that somehow diminishes my role. So I complicate it just enough to make it feel earned. I tell myself this will be appreciated. I imagine someone noticing the extra step and saying, "Wow, you really thought this through." That sentence has never been said to me in this context, but hope is powerful. As the task grows in my head, so does my confidence. Not because I know I'm right, but because I've invested time in it. Time creates attachment. Once I've thought about something long enough, it feels correct by default. Changing course now would mean admitting that the original, simple version was fine, and that all this thinking was optional. That's a hard pill to swallow when you've already swallowed the idea that you're doing something important. I start to feel like the task deserves a process. I slow myself down on purpose, telling myself that careful work takes time. Ignore the clock, because clocks create pressure, and pressure leads to mistakes. Or at least that's what I tell myself while creating entirely new ones. The simplicity I was handed at the beginning is gone now, replaced by a version that only exists because I needed it to feel serious. No point do I stop to ask whether this is still what she meant. That question doesn't even come up because I'm no longer working on her request. I'm working on my interpretation of it. And that interpretation feels solid, polished, and well-intentioned, which makes it incredibly difficult to abandon, even as I sense somewhere in the background this might be the exact moment where things quietly start going wrong. It doesn't hit me right away that I missed something important. At first, there's just a vague sense that the situation is lighter than it should be, like a piece of information didn't land, but I kept moving anyway. I replay the moment she explained it, not the words exactly, just the rhythm of her voice, trying to figure out where I nodded too confidently. I remember agreeing before the sentence ended, which felt polite at the time. Now it feels premature. The danger with nodding early is that it creates the illusion of understanding. Once you've signaled that you're on board, everyone moves on. No one circles back to check your comprehension. And I don't correct it, stopping someone mid-explanation to say, actually, I didn't get that. Feels like interrupting your own reputation. I've already presented myself as capable. Backtracking now would require paperwork. As I start the task, the gaps become more noticeable. Not obvious enough to panic, but enough to make me slow down and start filling in blanks with assumptions. I tell myself this is normal. Everyone improvises a little. But the problem is, I'm not improvising details, I'm improvising intent. I'm guessing what she wanted, not how she wanted it done. That's a much bigger gamble. Begin building a version of her expectations based on fragments. A word she emphasized, the way she gestured, the fact that she didn't seem worried. I treat these like clues in a mystery, as if the solution will reveal itself if I think hard enough. And the more I think, the more convinced I become that I'm close. Confidence grows not from clarity, but from repetition. If you repeat an assumption enough times in your head, it starts to sound like a fact. There's a moment where I almost ask, I even form the sentence. It's simple. It would take 5 seconds. But 5 seconds feels expensive when you've already spent minutes pretending you don't need them. Asking now would expose the nod. It would reveal that the agreement was more about momentum than understanding. So instead, I adjust the plan quietly, telling myself that flexibility is a skill. And this is what adaptable people do. I start working as if my interpretation is correct, but I leave room for correction later. Or at least I think I do. In reality, every step I take locks me further into the version I invented. The more effort I put in, the harder it becomes to imagine undoing it. I'm no longer just completing a task, I'm protecting a guess. What makes this especially dangerous is how reasonable it all feels. Nothing I'm doing is obviously wrong. It's just slightly off, and slightly off is hard to detect when you're the one standing in the middle of it. From my perspective, it looks intentional. It looks thought out. It looks like I knew what I was doing from the start. I convinced myself that if something were truly wrong, I'd know by now. That's how confidence works when it's built on incomplete information. It fills in silence with reassurance. The longer the silence lasts, the more certain you become that your understanding was correct all along, even as the foundation underneath it remains quietly unfinished, waiting for the moment someone else steps in and notices the part you never actually heard. Once I'm alone, something changes. It's subtle at first, but it's powerful. The absence of supervision feels like approval. No one has stopped me. No one has corrected me, and that silence starts to sound like trust. I take it as confirmation that I'm on the right path, even though no one has actually confirmed anything. Being alone gives my decisions more weight than they deserve, and I start treating my own thoughts like expert advice. Confidence grows faster when it doesn't have to answer questions. There's no pause for clarification, no raised eyebrow, no one casually saying, "Why are you doing it that way?" without those interruptions. Every idea feels cleaner, smarter, more intentional. I'm not just making choices, I'm endorsing them. Each step forward feels like proof that the last step was correct. Momentum replaces logic, and I mistake progress for accuracy. I begin trusting my instincts more than the original request. The task becomes flexible in my mind, something open to interpretation rather than something specific that needed to be followed. I tell myself that rigid instructions are limiting, and creativity is a sign of competence. This is how confidence disguises itself as professionalism. It convinces you that deviation is innovation, not risk. The longer I'm alone, the more I start enjoying the control. There's no negotiation, no compromise. I don't have to explain myself yet, which means I don't have to simplify my reasoning. Everything makes sense if I don't have to say it out loud. And because I don't hear my logic spoken, I don't hear the holes in it either. Silence becomes a collaborator. At some point, they're smart. I stop checking whether I'm still aligned with what she asked. That question quietly exits the room. Assume alignment because I want it to be true. I convince myself that if she were here, she'd see what I'm doing and understand immediately. I imagine her reaction in advance, but it's always a supportive version. She's nodding. She's impressed. She's thinking, I'm glad I trusted him. That imagined response fuels the next decision. Confidence also speeds things up in the wrong places. I make bigger changes faster because hesitation feels unnecessary now. I've already proven to myself that I know what I'm doing. Any doubt that creeps and gets labeled as overthinking and dismissed, I don't stop to verify, I commit. And commitment feels responsible, even when it's built on assumptions. There's a moment where I notice how far I've gone, and instead of pulling back, I lean in. Because pulling back would mean admitting that the earlier confidence might have been premature. It's easier to escalate than to reevaluate. Escalation feels decisive. Reevaluation feels like weakness. So I keep going, telling myself that finishing strong will justify everything that led up to it. By now, the task isn't something I'm handling anymore. It's something I've taken ownership of. I feel personally invested in the outcome, not because it matters more, but because I've made it matter. The isolation has given my confidence room to expand unchecked, and it fills that space completely, leaving no room for doubt. Only the quiet assumption that whatever happens next will somehow make sense once someone else walks back into the room. The shift happens the second she comes back, and it doesn't need words to announce itself. The room feels different. The air feels organized in a way it wasn't a moment ago. Her presence brings structure. Structure immediately exposes whatever I've been doing. I notice it before she says anything. That brief scan of the situation, the pause where her eyes move, but her expression doesn't. That pause is longer than any sentence she could say. It's the sound of someone recalculating trust. I'm still standing in the confidence I built while she was gone. Now it feels louder than it did before. Confidence doesn't know how to lower its volume on command. It just sits there, waiting to be validated. And when validation doesn't come immediately, it starts to feel awkward, like a guest who showed up too early and won't leave. She doesn't rush to correct me, which somehow makes it worse. She reacted instantly. I could respond instantly. I could explain. I could redirect. But silence forces reflection. Reflection is dangerous when you've been operating on assumptions. In that quiet moment, I realize I'm seeing the situation for the first time through her eyes, and it doesn't look the way it did from mine. I start talking before she asks anything. That's always my first mistake in these situations. I explain the logic behind decisions she didn't question yet. Use words like "I thought," and it made sense, and the way I understood it. Those phrases sound reasonable when you say them quickly. Sound defensive when you say them slowly. I don't notice the difference until it's too late. Her expression doesn't change much, but that's the point. It's not confusion. It's assessment. She's trying to understand not just what I did, but how I arrived there. I can tell from her face that the journey matters more than the destination. That's when I realize I might have solved the wrong problem very thoroughly. There's a moment where I consider stopping mid-explanation, just letting it sit, letting her speak. But momentum has me again. I keep going, hoping that if I explain it well enough, the result will become acceptable retroactively. As if clarity can rewrite intent. As if effort can replace accuracy. I'm trying to talk my way back to the moment. She trusted me instead of addressing what happened after. She finally says something simple. Not angry, not dramatic, just factual. That's when it lands. The gap between what she asked for and what I delivered becomes visible, not catastrophic. And that's worse. Big mistakes can be laughed off. Small, avoidable ones sit there quietly, asking why they happened at all. I feel the urge to justify again, but something holds me back this time. It's the realization that the explanation isn't helping, or maybe it's the awareness that the silence already said everything. The confidence I built alone doesn't disappear, but it shifts. It turns inward. It becomes self-conscious. Now I'm standing there, aware of the contrast between intention and impact, noticing details I overlooked earlier because no one was there to notice them with me. The task hasn't changed, but my understanding of it has, and that delayed clarity hangs in the room, heavy enough to keep me still, waiting for what comes next. Even after the realization hits, there's a strange kind of calm. I know I messed up. I can see it clearly, but I don't rush to fix it. That's not arrogance. It's something quieter. It's the acceptance that this is exactly how I operate. When left to my own devices, I create complications. Complications have consequences. I've learned over the years that panic rarely helps. So instead, I just observe. I watch the gap between expectation and result widen, and I notice all the little ways I could have prevented it, none of which I acted on in time. There's also a part of me that finds humor in it, not the loud, exaggerated kind, but the subtle, internal kind that grows as I replay every step I took. I see how confidently I nodded, how meticulously I over-prepared, how completely I misunderstood the original request. And in that reflection, there's comedy. The audience of one in my head starts laughing, because if I can't laugh at this, it'll just become stress. Stress never tells a good story. I notice too that the quiet aftermath is full of tension. My wife isn't yelling, she's just present. That's what makes it sharp. Silence is judgment when paired with expectation. I start anticipating her next move, replaying my decisions, questioning what she will notice first. Every small detail I adjusted alone becomes magnified under her gaze. I realize that accountability isn't loud. It's patient and observant, and that's harder to face. As I acknowledge the mistake, I also recognize the pattern. This isn't a one-off. Anytime I'm given autonomy, I tend to reinterpret instructions, complicate simplicity, and invest confidence prematurely. And that pattern is part of the humor, part of the charm. It's the predictable chaos of someone who thinks creativity equals competence. The joke isn't on her, and the audience, if there were one, would see it forming in real time. I start noticing my justifications too, how I internally defend the choices I made. Every thought is an attempt to reconcile intention with outcome. Well, technically, this still works. I tell myself it's different, but it's not wrong. And each rationalization stretches credibility just a little, highlighting the absurdity of being confident when the foundation was shaky. That's the essence of relatable comedy, the balance between self-assured action and quiet realization that none of it was necessary. Even though I'm aware of the mistake, I'm still drawn toward repetition. I know that given the same scenario, answer yes just as quickly. I might not before the sentence ends. I might overcomplicate something simple again. And that self-awareness mixed with the inevitability of repeating the same behavior is what keeps the story alive. It's not resolution that engages, it's recognition, the acknowledgement that human nature tends toward the same mistakes. With hindsight, at this point, reflection and humor intersect. I understand my flaw, I see the impact, yet I remain confident in my own style of failure. That tension creates space for audience engagement, because they can imagine themselves in my shoes, nodding along, understanding the allure of confidence in isolation. They can sense the quiet disaster unfolding, and that suspense keeps them invested. The story remains open, dynamic, and impossible to dismiss quickly, because there's always the lingering thought that what happened could happen again, exactly the same imperfect way. So after all that, she looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said much. And that's when I realized something important. 5 minutes is a long time when you're left alone with your own confidence. It's enough time to overthink, overcomplicate, and somehow turn a simple request into a quiet disaster. And the best part is, I still believe I was helping. That's the part I tell people afterward. Because the truth is, the mistake isn't just that I failed. The mistake is that I'm proud of how I did it.